Developing players is going to be key for the White Sox to turn things around. Let's discuss just how hard that is going to be with my guest next on Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode, subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show at wherever you get your podcasts. Well, this is going to be a monumental rebuild for the Chicago White Sox, and if it's going to work, player development will be key. And I spoke with former White Sox hitting coordinator Ryan Johansen about how hard it is to develop a player. Then let's discuss how Eloy Jimenez may have found the one team he could thrive on. And finally, should it be concerning that the Sox hired someone with close ties to Tony LaRussa to be in the front office? The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it is not too late to get in with the regular season action with FanDuel, because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And thanks for joining me, Ryan. So, Ryan, just how hard is it to develop a prospect?
Yeah, Todd. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. It's certainly not an easy thing, right? And I think defining development is kind of the first step. Like, what are you trying to develop? Like, why was this player scouted? What do we think he's already good at? What level do we need him to get to, and how fast, right? Developing an 18-year-old kid versus a 23-year-old kid is two totally different conversations. I do think one thing that people don't necessarily, realize, especially if they're, outside looking in, is the player really has to want to develop in the way that is cohesive with the organization, right? So whether it's, obviously in the context of today, we're talking about the White Sox, but across the league, if a player is not really bought into what the organization's trying to do, it becomes very challenging very quickly, which doesn't mean that the player won't make it to the big leagues. It just means that there might be some bumps and bruises along the way, as opposed to, hey, we scouted this guy. Okay, we gave him some tips. All right, now he's in the show. Typically, there's some other things that happen when it does go that smoothly, outside of what player development actually is, able to accomplish.
So what goes into like developing a hitter, like let's say even to just a replacement level player or even above?
Yeah. Tell me more about what specifically you want me to touch on in that regard.
For example, the White Sox are trying to get Colson Montgomery into a stud, but also maybe Rico Nishida. He might be a guy that you develop into a regular, outfielder who's at the top of your leadoff.
Yeah. So I think, a guy like Colson, incredible athlete. I mean, I'm sure everybody, probably who's just listening to this, knows his story in terms of, had an opportunity to go play basketball in Indiana, ended up choosing, baseball out of high school. Tremendous human being. I think last year, a lot of the stuff that I read was, Colson struggling, Colson's having a hard time. We got to get Colson going. There was kind of a lot of panic around Colson Montgomery. And myself, looking at this point, I haven't been with the Sox in 2 years, but I do know Colson. I wasn't concerned. I see a very young player playing at a very high level for the very first time, seeing things that he hasn't seen before. And I think when we try to rush guys, because either, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to get this first round pick to the show in X amount of years. Like, everyone's on their own timeline. Like, I think that can be problematic as well. I'm not surprised by how Colson performed last year. I thought it was at a level that made sense for his journey and how quickly he kind of did move through the organization. But yeah, I definitely can see why there's some, some questions or some concerns going into it. If the expectation was, hey, this guy's going to be show ready in 2024. And he still has some developing to do.
Why do organizations kind of get into that where, hey, we got to rush guys in? Because it sounds like, everybody should be on their own timeline. And I get that, there's always another draft. The show always keeps going on. But sometimes why can't it hurt to just be patient with some guys?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think there's twofold, right? I think like you look at a team like last year's Sox, and obviously I'm not Chris Getz, and I haven't had this conversation with Chris Getz. I can't specifically speak for him in this moment. In terms of, when I see what happened last year in Colson, I think a lot of guys were like, "Spring Colson up, give him a shot. Like season's lost anyways. Like get him get big league at bats." There can be a lot of mental stuff going on when you're trying to do a rebuild and you're trying to do these things and you see a guy who can potentially be an anchor of your team. The last thing you want to do is rush him to a spot where he's not going to grow at the appropriate pace, right? And then on the flip side, it's like, okay, hey, he's only hitting 220, but what's happening mindset wise? And is there a reason why he's not performing in a way that he's currently capable of? And I'll tell a story about another prospect. And I won't necessarily name his name, but I'm sure people may figure it out. They may not. I think of back in 2021 spring training, and we had a player who had no shot at making the big league club, but he thought he was going to make the big league club, and his spring, or he thought he had an opportunity to make the big league club, I should say, and his spring was terrible and absolutely atrocious. Everything from his dad in the stands taking video of him, every coordinator that possibly touched hitters was around the cage, hitting coaches constantly, flooding this guy, ton of information. Like, we got to get him right. We got to get it right. Just panic. Just everybody's panicking, right? And it got to a point where, we did all the tech stuff and all the data stuff. And in my role, they were like, "Ryan, like, what can we fix? What's going on?" And I was like, "Man, this huge giant document says, like, leave this guy alone. Like, he's good. Like, this is a mental thing. Maybe we should tell him he doesn't have a shot at making the big league club." And that has nothing to do with his performance. It has to do with the appropriate pace that he's potentially going to get there. Well, that player no longer plays for the White Sox, and he's been very successful at the big league level since then. And he actually settled down, finished spring training at a really good rate and really good clip. Had a great AAA year, was in the show later that year, and is having a phenomenal career. And he will continue to have a phenomenal career. So I think as humans and as coaches, like, we want to coach, right? Developers want to develop, fans want to see, the success and things like that. But there's a lot of stuff that goes on, like politically. There's obviously red tape from a financial aspect, like how much is invested in players, like who's supposed to be the guy and who's not, who's got clout in the organization from scouting, from player development, like what are the political parties there, and things like that. So I don't know if that answered your question in terms of like pace of play, or what the pressure is, but there's definitely, I kind of took that question two different directions. So I'm not sure if that was helpful or not.
No, it was. I mean, because again, when it comes to developing a prospect, I think sometimes people just don't understand like what goes in, like the instruction, the training, all that stuff. And it's just easy to say, well, for example, the White Sox, they just don't develop players, Gavin Sheets, all that. But it's like, there's a lot that goes in. And as you said, there's politics in that. Like, for example, it's got to be hard. I'm not blaming the owner here, but just for any team, even the player to tell an owner, yeah, that guy that we just gave a $5 million bonus to, it may take XYZ to get there. And that owner being like, but I just gave him $5 million, that's got to be sometimes some of those political things that you guys have to navigate. Correct?
Yeah, definitely. It's like, well, why do we sign this guy if he wasn't ready, or we signed him because we thought this? And then if he's not that, somebody has to be wrong. Right. And nobody wants to put anybody on blast for, we shouldn't have signed this guy for this amount of money, like, and things like that. Now, obviously it's organizations' jobs to, audible and adapt and make good business decisions after that, decision's been made. And, quite frankly, like, teams do miss time at times, right? Like teams do miss. Part of the reason that the draft has been so quote unquote successful in terms of first through, third rounders or whatever else is because of the political clout. There's a lot of guys that probably could have had other opportunities or more opportunities, or at least survived longer had they been drafted in a different round, despite their performance, right? They could have had the exact same performance, or in some cases worse performance, and he elongated their career just based on where they were drafted. And so that's something where, outside looking in, you want to look at it as, organizations have to make better decisions once they get there. Like, you have to be able to audible and call that play when the time comes. But that's industry wide, right? Like, it's not just one organization, it's industry wide. So it's just the reality of the business of it as well.
So it sounds like also a lot of player development issues just come down to perception, and especially from the business perception of, this money being invested when it's really like when you look at, for example, Juan Soto getting now $765 billion. Wouldn't it make more sense to obviously be, hey, let me audible a little bit more. Let's be more flexible, because if this guy does get to the show for for 6 years, he's not going to cost you $765 million.
Yeah, and with contracts like that, I mean, obviously, I think there was a little bit of, I can't speak to the Mets. I don't know Steve at all. I don't know any of the people who made that decision, in any of those regards. But I think when you look at some things, whether it's Shohei, whether it's Soto, you're looking at jersey sales, you're looking at advertisements, you're looking at all these other things. There's business decisions to sign certain players outside of even their performance. And things like that. The Dodgers are certainly, reaping the business benefits of having, a lot of Japanese businesses air advertisements in certain spaces and put advertisements in their stadium at certain times, and they can charge a premium for it because they've got Shohei, right? So they make their money back in other ways outside of just winning games. And I don't know what the case with Soto and all the things and all the expectations, around that were. Outside of, the Mets wanting to sign him away from the Yankees.
Yeah. So how does a player even get to like prospect status? What work do they have to put in to even like get consideration to be, to get drafted?
Yeah. I mean, typically, the simplest way to put it, with our time today is like, you typically have to have one tool that is so far above everybody else that it makes you stand out. There's a lot of really, really solid baseball players that would probably be pretty successful in the minor leagues and have a chance that don't get seen or don't get picked up because they're just too average, right? They blend in, or they just got too average at too old of an age. But being, as young as you can with a tool that stands out so far above everybody else that it's a can't miss, that's kind of how you become a prospect, whether that's catch and throw as a catcher, whether that's power as a hitter. Typically the lower levels contact isn't one of those things at the lower levels, just because the pitching isn't reflective enough to say that like you're going to be able to make the ball go forward at the next level as at the same clip that you have now. I think of like a guy like Madrigal, back in, what was that, 2000, was that 17 or 18? And, when you see high contact guys in high school, it's just the pitching isn't reflective enough to say they're going to be able to do that at the next level. So having something like power, having something like speed, something a little bit more tangible, that somebody can say, wow, this is different, is how you kind of stand out and get drafted.
Well, Ryan, you've been so generous with your time. What does your school, so, your services provide? I just want to give you an opportunity to plug all your stuff.
Yeah, Todd, I appreciate that. So we kind of work with organizations across 3 different levels. So we help organizations scale their development. And the first layer is like organic development through scalable practice plans. So typically we focus on offensive development. So kind of like offensive culture, things like that. We can come in and train your coaches, train your teams at a high level. Hey, here's some things that we really believe in. We get everybody on the same page. We make sure we're speaking the same language. And it's kind of the overarching offensive culture. Our 3 core values are balance, path, and power. So we funnel all that through our development plans. The second layer is what we call like our asynchronous learning, or things that players can do at home. It's a question that a lot of coaches get asked. What can I do at home? What can I do at home? What can I do at home? Hey, it's great that you guys come in and train our team. Like, what's next? So we actually have the ability to evaluate players and give them custom practice plans that they can go do and with that in the garage, with that in the basement, with that at a cage that they rent, with that at a field that they go and throw BP at. And there's specific drills and BP mindsets and things like that. But that's something they can totally do on their own. There's not necessarily a coach needed. It's all laid out for them. And then the third layer is our continued mentorship. So that's typically things that like one-on-one hitting sessions, small group hitting sessions, where we're able to actually ask players like, hey, what do you want to talk about today? What are you struggling with? What do you want to get better at? Where do you specifically want to go? And there's a lot of things that go into that, whether that's recruiting help or whatever else. But that's kind of, think of like your traditional private lesson, for lack of a better term. I don't love that phrase, but that might resonate with people who are listening. So those are kind of our 3 learning paths. And then we do have a podcast as well. It's just called Johansen Baseball 2.0 podcast. The reason for that is if people Google it, it's really easy to find. They don't have to remember any kind of name or anything like that. And so we have a lot of guests on there. Clint Hurdle's been on there. Andy Barquette, who used to work with the Sox, was on there, told a lot of great stories about his time with the World Series, with the Boston Red Sox. We've had Brandon Guyer on there, Major League Mindset. We've had a lot of really good dudes on there, kind of sharing wisdom and things like that. It's been fun. So certainly not as fancy as the setup that I see here. So I may have to pick your brain at some point about that.
And no problem. And also, you got a stacked staff, right? For people to learn from. I know you got the former AA pitching coach Jonathan Eloy on there and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, so John Eli's our pitching coordinator. So he does the exact same path that I just talked about from an offensive standpoint. He does it on the pitching side. Tremendous pitching instructor. He retired this past year after winning the Southern League with his group. They led the league in ERA, and they had some other cool KPIs. I think they were like top velocity across the league and some other cool stuff. He's too humble to talk about it, but I don't have the list right in front of me. But yeah, John's an awesome guy, an incredible communicator. An incredible instructor, and his wife just had a baby, so I was kind of the catalyst to him retiring, wanted to be home with his dad, and we were able to kind of join forces and give him an opportunity to do that.
Well, Ryan, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Todd. Anytime.
Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about and that you were paying for twice? Come to think of it, I need to check them out, as I'm sure I've got some subscriptions out there that I probably don't need anymore or probably forgot about. And I hear it's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Okay, now I definitely have to check out Rocket Money if I can find those types of savings, especially with Christmas bills coming due soon. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions. Reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me, as this is the only podcast dedicated to the White Sox, talking 5 days a week, year-round. So I'm catching up, though, on the Sox news I missed when I did take Christmas Eve and Christmas Day off. I think I'm entitled to at least take 2 days off for the holiday season, and I hope you guys all had a great holiday, had a great Christmas, and Hanukkah, I know, has just started up, so hopefully that all goes well for you. But I believe in October I talked about how Eloy Jimenez will always go down as the biggest disappointment in Sox history. For me, he's definitely number one, just because you got a glimpse of his ability to be a superstar. Not just a regular slugger, not like Diane Vicieto. We're talking about a stud, a guy that should have been a franchise corner piece for the next 10 seasons. You know, especially when he hit 31 home runs in 2019, his rookie season. But he would go on to have 20 debilitating injuries that required him to miss a lot of time, especially from 2021 through when the Sox finally cut bait on him by the trade deadline when they traded him to the Baltimore Orioles. Think about that. 20 different injuries. And Eloy never hit more than 20 home runs in a season after 2019. So the thing about it, he spent probably more time on the injured list with random injuries than actually doing what he was paid to do, and that was supposed to be to crush the ball a country mile. And that's the other thing. The Sox paid him even before he debuted, and they didn't need to pay him. They should have never paid him. You know, because clearly, you know, there's some speculation that paying him the millions led to him to having some stellar, less than stellar work habits. You know, some guys are motivated by the finances. And if you get those guys when they're younger, that's fine, because you can always dangle the carrot. It's when they obviously hit free agency, you don't want to pay them those guys, because then they'll just potentially maybe stop working altogether. But either way, man, his fall from grace has been astonishing. He went from a 6-year, $43 million deal with the White Sox to possibly having just a shot to earn $2 million with the Tampa Bay Rays. He just signed a minor league deal, and it's a long shot that he even gets that $2 million, as he has to get 500 at bats to earn $2 million. So not only does he have to make the team, but then he has to be basically in the lineup every day. And he's only done that once, his 2019 season, when he had 500 at bats. The next closest he came was 489 at bats in 2023. But as I wrote on SouthsideShowdown.com, and I know Jordan Lazowski from Sox on 35th, he echoed that on Twitter. Look, you can just see now Eloy's going to go to Tampa and likely thrive. Like, watch, he'll go hit 48 home runs now in Tampa. Because one reason he might thrive is he might be motivated by the finances. I mean, this is his last chance. This is it for him. But the other reason why he might thrive is this is what Tampa does. They take players off the scrap heap and they revive them. Something I would love to see the Sox do during this rebuild. I know every day have heard me say that, like Cal Mitchell. Obviously it's not like something you should be like, hey, this guy's going to be our Brent Rooker, but there's nothing wrong with finding guys off the scrap heap and seeing if you can revive them. Because again, you don't, I know I beat this like a dead horse, but you do not get Scott Podsednik if he's not taken off the scrap heap. But this is what Tampa does with their small market finances. They have to either draft and develop their players or find failed guys and revive them. And you don't believe me? Look at how Avisail Garcia got a second act with the Rays after failing on the South Side. The only difference between Avi and Eloy is Garcia's career year in 2017 earned him an all-star nod. Otherwise, both were big disappointments. Garcia was supposed to be a pillar of the lineup, kind of help support Chris Sale and Jose Quintana, be one of those core players, last decade to help, get them to the playoffs. And they never came close because a lot of it was Avi's struggles, other than his 2017 season when he had that 330, 380, 506 slash line. But otherwise, he was just nothing but a disappointment. Could never live up to that 2017 numbers, could never really produce. Goes to the Rays. It's 282 with a WRC plus of 113. Because again, the Rays culture and attention to making players better and valuing them like human beings, having them fly on a nice, airline, on a nice plane, those little tiny things that they do because they know they compete in the margins with big market behemoths. So I could see Eloy going there and doing quite well big if here, his body allows him. Because the other factor that I know that I have to give Eloy a little bit of grace is maybe just there is something with his body that just won't allow him to handle the rigors of a 162 game schedule. Maybe he is doing the stretching. It's speculated that he never really did a lot of the work, but there might be just something biologically wrong that just isn't going to allow him to hold up. And that has happened. Mark Pryor is a prime example of that. His arm, his body just could not sustain the rigors of even 35 starts. Some people are just built differently. But for the Rays, this is also a good kick the tires on a player who has power in his bat, but never harnesses it. Because that's the other most frustrating thing about Eloy was he just always had this tendency to put the ball on the ground. Now, it could have been a lot of the injuries were not allowing him to lift the ball. But talk about a guy who just, he's a giant of a human being. And he acted like, he was, Nicky Lopez out there trying to put the ball on the ground. But this is definitely his last shot because it's a minor league deal with the Tampa Bay Rays. And if he can't make it in Tampa, he isn't going to make it anywhere in the majors. Well, the White Sox front office, made a move that makes you wonder if Shadow GM Tony LaRussa wanted this to happen. And I'll discuss Phil Nevin joining management after the break. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And I always maintain FanDuel's traditional spreads, money lines, and over-unders. They're fun to play, but if you want to win big or at least have a chance to double or even triple your money, FanDuel's parlays, props, and futures is the way to go. A popular parlay for tonight's Seattle and Chicago game is Zach Charbonnet, Keenan Allen, Jackson Smith and Njingwa, and Roma Dunze, all scoring an anytime touchdown. That is at plus 4,845 the last time I checked. You put $10 on that and it hits, you could win $484.56. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox or wherever they get their podcasts, as this show is available on all major podcast platforms. Hope you had a great Christmas. To obviously those who celebrate Christmas, hey, we we diversify here at Locked On White Sox, or first day of Hanukkah, all that type of stuff. My Christmas was pretty good, pretty low key. My daughter was in the Nutcracker Ballet here in Milwaukee. So after the performance, we're going to order Chinese, and went to put in the order about 4:30. They said the earliest I could get my order would be at like 7:30 or 8. Ended up actually having a nice Christmas Eve dinner at Cheesecake Factory, actually. So, hey, they're open on Christmas Eve if you're ever looking for a last minute backup plan to go out to eat. And then otherwise went down to Johnsburg, Illinois yesterday, spent some time with my dad and my mom. So, my dad still says that the White Sox are absolutely awful. And I think the Bears have broken my dad. My dad is like 80 years old, and he finally says he can't. He's 81. He says he cannot watch Chicago Bears football. And this man made me watch not only the White Sox, but terrible Chicago Bears football in the 90s. So there's that. Well, on the surface, there's really nothing wrong with hiring Phil Nevin as a special assistant and the player development partner. There's really nothing wrong. Former big league manager with the Los Angeles Angels. Did some minor league managing with the Tigers, Diamondbacks. Remember that stint, as I'll touch on that in a second. And the Giants. He was the third base coach for the Yankees. Worked under Joe Madden in L.A. before taking over for him when the Angels fired him. Shohei Ohtani seems to like him. He was the manager for Ohtani. So again, nothing wrong with adding an experienced big league guy to help out in player development. We talked about how player development is going to be key in the first segment with my guest, Ryan Johansen. But there's nothing wrong with having him assisting and scouting prospects for the draft either. But here's why I get that terrible feeling in my gut that just, when I saw the news, is Nevin is closely tied to Tony LaRussa, the shadow GM of the team. And no matter what Chris Getz tries to do when it comes to updating and reforming the front office, you still have the two dark clouds hanging over this franchise and LaRussa and team owner Jerry Reinsdorf. And you can say I'm negative, and I saw a 1-star review saying I'm negative, but hey, guys, nothing's been positive since Tony LaRussa has come to this organization. Okay? You could throw the 2021 AL Central title all you want, but it gets ruined by just how they got taken to the woodshed by the Houston Astros, and then just how the team has rotted. Nothing's been positive ever since. And yes, I'm going to take a shot at a guy who gave me a 1-star review. Oh, you're negative. Bad takes. Well, negative. What's positive about this franchise right now? What is positive? And you get Nevin in the front office, and he was a finalist for the manager position. And you got the feeling the only reason why he was a finalist was LaRussa, because you saw who was the guys that Chris Getz was targeting. Will Venable, the bench coach from Cleveland, who I just forgot off the top of my head, and Grady Sizemore. 3 guys outside the organization. Well, Grady was with the organization as the interim, but he came in from outside the organization. No ties to Tony. Nevin, he's your Tony guy. So you have to give him a token interview to keep the shadow GM, Jerry's BFF, satisfied. And again, why am I drawing the dots? I shared this in October, but I'll bring it up again from AZ Central's Zach Buchanan on September 15th, 2015. This is Tony talking about Nevin almost getting the Diamondbacks job in 2014 when Tony was running the club. Quote, he's highly rated. He did a hell of an interview. He got serious consideration for this job. He would do an outstanding job. I think Phil would be on a list of guys, if you put that in parentheses, to be another manager, end quote. That's what LaRussa said. And he was he was always raving about Nevin. And in my gut, this feels like another hire just to pacify Tony. Just like having to change the name of the analytics department and expand it to research and development just to make Tony and Jerry happy, because you know how much they don't like having numbers people taking over the game. So you have to change it to, research and development and expand that department to get the authorization, because it's research and development. It's not numbers, Tony. It's not numbers, Tony or Jerry. We're not crunching the numbers there. We're not doing the data and analytics. We're just going to do research and development. Yeah, that's it. And again, you can call me negative, but again, what has been positive with this organization since that ball landed in an Iowa cornfield in 2021 off of Tim Anderson's home run? Because again, the playoffs, you had the blackout game in game 3, but otherwise you got smoked in 1 and 2 and in 4. And you just keep having to make moves to pacify the two dark clouds. And I know this is minor, but it's just another example of how Getz likely has to do certain things to make Tony and Jerry happy. And that shouldn't be the case. He should be doing things to make the White Sox better. And we can always have the conversation is Chris Getz even able to do that? He's doing the easy part. It's very easy to be like, man, this front office is operating still like it's in 2005. Let's update things. And I'll go get some smart people. Now you have to execute. Now you have to find the players. And he's been making some prudent moves. But we're talking about like better players, obviously, and develop the better players that you draft. But you're always going to have potentially Tony LaRussa. Now you're going to have his guy probably looking for his type of players for a game that has been passed by 13 years ago. That was the thing that Tony got exposed on. Yes, Tony LaRussa is a Hall of Fame manager. I will give him his flowers. And for those that defend Tony, he doesn't need it. He does not care. I've met the man. He does not care what you think about him. He doesn't care what anybody thinks about him, unless he really does a good job of hiding it. Anytime I've ever interviewed him, that's a man who I can look in the eyes and say he doesn't give a bleep about what anybody thinks about him. And he was a Hall of Fame manager, but the game changed. When he came back, he didn't change with it. So, honestly, too, when I was thinking about it, I'm like, wait a minute, having a guy just maybe scout some players, because that's what Bob Nightingale of USA Today reported, that he's also going to help scout draft prospects. I'm like, that would actually be the ideal role for Tony. Have him go off to some high school to look at some fringe players that you're not even going to think about drafting. Like, that's where I would send him off to. I'd be like, yeah, Tony, we're really thinking about these guys. Why don't you go out and take a look? That way you can tell Jerry, if Jerry asks, well, are we keeping my BFF happy? Because that's all this is. The only reason why Tony LaRussa is still involved with the White Sox is Jerry wants to keep Tony involved in baseball because Tony wants to be involved in baseball. That's what's highly speculated, that Tony cannot leave the game even though he's had major health issues. That Jerry wants to keep him involved. Well, fine. Put him in this role. Have him go off and look at some prospects. Tell you, hey, does this bat, does the ball coming off the bat sound like Mark McGwire when he was hitting it? That type of stuff. Those little things. That's fine. But having Tony as a special advisor and in reality likely still having him have tremendous influence is why you have to be scared that this monumental rebuild will not work out. It's one of the many, many reasons. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And I'll be back tomorrow to discuss, have I been way too hard on Miguel Vargas? And I'll bring you another Top 5 Friday. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding how hard it is to develop prospects. Eloy Jimenez going to Tampa and Phil Nevin joining the front office. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub, or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at LockedOnWhiteSox@gmail.com. Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.